Hi, my name is Jackson Beard, and today I want to give you some of my favorite transgender book recommendations. People are always asking me for recommendations of books with trans or non-binary characters in them, and I know I used to be on the hunt for them as well. Back when I was in college, I read through like the entire trans section in the library, which was mostly very academic gender study kind of things. But over the years, I feel like I've gotten a pretty good handle on the trans book scene. So today I thought I would share some of my favorites as well as my TBR list, which is to be read list, as I have learned from booktubers. Also, as I am a trans masculine person, most of these books are gonna fall along that line, not all of them, but I have also linked to some Goodreads lists down in the description box for recommendations for trans feminine and non-binary experiences. Along the sort of like 101 figuring out your gender or figuring out what trans means if you are a parent or friend or ally, some of my favorites are My Gender Workbook by Kate Bornstein. It's an actual workbook. There's like quizzes and crossword puzzles and all kinds of stuff, and it is super fun. Another kind of 101 book that I really liked is Just Add Hormones by Matt Kailey. I hate the cover of this. I wish there were another edition. Maybe there is, I just haven't found it yet. This goes through Matt's story and like his life and figuring out his identity, but it also has lots and lots of very practical information about transitioning, so it's a great beginner book. Getting into more 201 level, for like when you've learned the basics but you're really wanting to sink your teeth into some of the bigger questions, I've got a lot of books for that. Elliott DeLine self-publishes a lot of like books of essays and like short memoir-ish type of things. This is the only one that I've read in its entirety, but he is amazing. He's got a great writing style. He is queer and autistic and talks a lot about both of those things as well as his gender identity, and it's great to kind of see those things represented in literature. My number one top recommended trans book of all time, and in fact, probably my number one recommended feminist book, just like if you want to think that you support all genders and are a feminist, this is required reading for you. It is Whipping Girl by Julia Serano. So trans people have a very unique perspective into misogyny and how women are treated in society and in public spaces. And oftentimes trans men are the ones who get that platform to talk about that because we're the ones who are like, oh, I suddenly had privilege. But it's weird to me that we're like validating women's experiences by listening to men. So I always think that we should listen to trans women in that case. And Julia Serano does an amazing job of breaking down like the loss of privilege that she experienced and why that is, and just, she just covers everything, and this book is just so good. You have to read it. It will make you so much smarter, and I want everyone in the entire world to read this book. If you want more of those like higher level gender theory type of books, I definitely recommend anything by S. Bear Bergman and Kate Bornstein. Kate Bornstein is the one who did the Gender Workbook, and also another book I love by them is A Queer and Pleasant Danger, which is their memoir, the true story of a nice Jewish boy who joins the Church of Scientology and leaves 12 years later to become the lovely lady she is today. Kate Bornstein has lived quite the life, but they've also written a ton of other books, and I really enjoy everything that she writes. And since I mentioned Kate Bornstein's memoir, let's move into what is probably the largest chunk of trans literature, which is memoirs. One of my favorite new memoirs is called Balls by Chris Edwards. It's about his bottom surgery. I mean, it's about more than that, but that's kind of obviously the focus. It's about his journey to get some balls. Chris transitioned back in, I think, the 90s, and he transitioned on the job and didn't lose his job and wasn't rejected by his family. So while he has like a little bit of the past generation experiences with being trans, he also has some of the more modern acceptance experiences. And also like bottom surgery tends to be kind of a taboo subject in some trans masculine communities. So I enjoy anyone who's willing to put their experiences out there and actually talk about like the facts and what it is really like. So it's a good one, and he has a hilarious family, so it was a fun read. I got this from the library, so I don't have a copy, but Man Alive by Thomas Page McBee. It's framed around one particular incident that happens to him, and so it's him grappling a lot with his problems with men and masculinity, but his feeling of identifying as one, which is something that super resonated with me. It's one of those books that just feels like an experience as you're reading it. I've talked about this book before, but Darling Days by Io Tillet writes, to my knowledge, and not within the book, like Io doesn't exactly identify with a certain label. They're kind of non-binary, and a lot of their book is about growing up, how they were always expressing their gender in a different way and what that was like. They also face a lot of other things in their life. There's a lot of heavy stuff that's covered in here. Whittlinger, a lot about his relationship with his mom. I also love it because the Lower East Side, New York City history that you get from like the late 80s, early 90s. But I also just love it because I love having like a mainstream traditional media representation of a non-binary person. Like, this is great. Speaking of which, I also just read Eddie Izzard's memoir, Believe Me. Eddie also doesn't exactly have a label in the modern type of terminology that we would be using. He does identify as transgender and talks a lot in this book about how that is the term he uses now because that is the term we all use now. But yes, he was made famous in all of his stand-up comedy talks about him being a transvestite, which was the language that was being used when he was growing up in the 70s and 80s. But also he's just such an accomplished dude, and you get a lot of kind of like practical tips about work ethic and creativity and achieving your dreams and stuff like that. So it's a good book. He's my hero, so of course I liked it. Pivoting slightly into biographies, I haven't actually finished this one yet. This is a biography of Kirstin Jorgensen. Some of it takes from, I think, like her personal journals or something, so it's like sort of called an autobiography. Kirstin Jorgensen is one of the trans women to know from history, especially I think right now with everything being talked about trans people in the military. She medically transitioned in 1952 and is sometimes like hailed as like the first American, I think, but she was also a GI, and so of course it had lots of very scandalous headlines because the most macho of macho, like, became a woman. But I think it's really good to know that part of our history. I recommend this book with a grain of salt, but it was one of my favorite books that I got back at the NYU library, and I've read so many times. It was one that was really like my security blanket during some of my early days of figuring out my identity, and that is The First Man-Made Man by Pagan Kennedy. It's the biography of Michael Dillon, who's often said to be the first trans man to medically transition in America. Europe? Was it Europe? I think he was European. The reason I recommend it with a grain of salt is it is written by a cisgender person, and the use of birth name and pronouns is not how one would probably write it these days, you know? But it gives you so much history on what was going on with medical transitions in the early 20th century, what was available, what was being experimented with. Michael Dillon pioneered a lot of that because he was actually a medical student, and it does talk about a couple of other trans people at the time, some trans female contemporaries. There's a bit about Lily Elba, aka the Danish girl. So it's a really good history book, but it was written quite a while ago, so not everything is going to be the most up-to-date terminology. The next book is not about a trans person, but I do recommend it. So this is As Nature Made Him, The Boy Who Was Raised a Girl. Some of you may have heard the very tragic case of David Raymer. He was born an identical twin, and he had a botched circumcision, and his parents got very, very bad advice that because of his now ambiguous genitalia, they should raise him as a girl. And there was a psychiatrist named Dr. Money who was like following them throughout their lives as David and his brother grew up, with David being raised as a girl, and it never worked. He was born a boy, he always identified as a boy, even though he was being forced to live as a girl. I mean, I ripped through this book. I actually read it in one day, which does not usually happen to me with nonfiction books like this. Often, some haters like to bring up the case of David Raymer as an example for like why kids should not be allowed to transition, or just why like trans people aren't real in general. But really, it's a case for why gender identity is actually so persistent and how you can't make someone live as the gender that they don't identify as, because they were doing absolutely everything to raise David as a girl, and it did not work because he was a boy. So if you're someone who gets in debates with people about gender, it's a good thing to have full knowledge of, but also, it's a really good book, but I mean, every trigger warning under the sun, this is a horrifically tragic tale. So moving along into YA, this is a great segue because these are memoirs and YA. We've got Rethinking Normal by Katie Rain-Hill and Some Assembly Required by Arin Andrews. These kind of go together. They don't have to, though. Katie is a woman of trans experience, and she wrote this while she was in college, majoring in 3 different things, so she's like superwoman. I don't understand. And I love both of these because they read like fiction YA novels, but they're actually memoirs of their actual lives, which is really cool. They dated at one point, which is why their books kind of go together. You kind of see both sides of their relationship, which is interesting. Also, Arin makes YouTube videos, so you can see a third side of it from his YouTube videos he was making at the time. Arin is a trans guy. That's another reason these are great, that they go together, because you've got the trans feminine experience and the trans masculine experience. And yeah, if you are looking for YA books from either side of the spectrum, I recommend both of these. They're just exactly what you want in a trans YA book, frankly. Probably the most commonly recommended trans masculine YA novel out there is Parrotfish by Ellen Whittlinger. It wasn't my favorite book that I've ever read, but I did, of course, love the representation. It has some sort of like practical, realistic information about what transition is like for a teenager and how families and friends would respond to it, so it's definitely good from that perspective. Sometimes, in contrast to Parrotfish, I like to recommend Beautiful Music for Ugly Children by Kirstin Cronn-Mills. It is also a novel about a transmasculine teenager. This one, I feel like, is a little bit cooler. I related to the character's interests a bit more. He's like an up-and-coming DJ and starts this like underground movement, not in an activist way, just like in a fun way. Although I did think it was a little bit less of a practical representation of what transitioning is like for a teenager as compared to Parrotfish, and certainly as compared to Katie and Arin's books. But I genuinely liked this one as a story. Another YA book that, oh my gosh, is one of my favorite books ever, Two Boys Kissing by David Levithan. There's like 6 main characters, like 3 different couples, and only one of them is a trans guy. But he's portrayed so well, and it's beautiful, and really this book is just, oh my gosh, it's so good. So it goes in between the 3 like contemporary teenage couples, and then you've got this sort of like group narrator that seems to be some of the folks who died during the AIDS epidemic, and they're kind of watching the current generation and talking to them, and it's just so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And David Levithan is so great about including trans characters in his book. Every day there is also a trans character. I love that representation, and this book makes me cry. Since I was talking about YA books, we'll jump down a little bit. This is YA, maybe middle grade, almost, Lily and Dunkin by Donna Gephart. Lily is a trans girl, Dunkin is bipolar, and it's about them becoming friends and learning about each other and what each other's lives are like with the different challenges that they have, and about their families and how they deal with their families. And I would highly recommend it for like younger trans kids and their parents to read together, maybe. This one is definitely middle grade. This is David Walliams, The Boy in the Dress. David Walliams is an English comedian. You might know him from Little Britain. He's also become like a very prolific children's writer. And he is known for being very effeminate. He's not super open about his sexuality, but he, you know, is kind of in the pansexual category. And so this book, I think, is one that meant a lot to him and has meant a lot to a lot of people. It's a very good, basically, children's book about a boy who wants to wear a dress. He also wants to play soccer, and all of that is fine. So going back to grown-up adult books, this book definitely deals with adult themes. No House to Call My Home by Ryan Berg. This is non-fiction based on true stories of Ryan's experience as a social worker, and there are, I believe, a couple of trans characters. There's at least one. He tells a lot of stories of kids in LGBTQ youth homes where he has worked for most of his career. And it's also a lot of his own unpacking that he does as a more privileged white cisgender gay man. It illuminates a lot of things that I think a lot of people need to hear. This book was interesting, Lost Boy by Sassafras Lowrey. It is about a bunch of boys, like BOI boys. It's like a queer punk retelling of Peter Pan that's made up of like runaway boys and other queer people. There's definitely like BDSM elements, not so much in like the actual actions taking place, but in those types of relationship structures. It is not exactly what I thought I was getting into, but I really appreciated existing. All right, next I have 3 books that I need to finish reading. First is Revolutionary by Alex Myers. Now this is a cool book because the author is a trans guy and he's writing about his actual ancestor who, it's tough to talk about people's identities when they are from the past and we didn't know them. So for the sake of everything, we will say this person was female assigned at birth and dressed as a man to fight as a soldier in the Revolutionary War. And it is a novel, and I've really been enjoying it so far, and I just think that it's really cool that this trans guy has this gender non-conforming ancestor and wrote a novel about them, and that's really cool. This book just came out, I think, this year, actually. It's called At the Broken Pieces, and it is a book written by a trans guy and his mother, and it's sort of like essays back and forth, sort of about them repairing their relationship. As every trans person knows, there can be a lot of tension between you and your parents, even if they don't outright reject you. Maybe they don't talk to you for a few years. Maybe a lot of other things you hadn't been talking about for a while bubble up to the surface. So this is sort of like a healing book between the two of them. And finally, I've thought about reading this book forever and finally picked it up on a whim at Blue Stockings. Real Man Adventures by T. Cooper. I mean, how can you not love this cover, and the whole art design is just great. From what I know, T. Cooper is like pretty much heterosexual, like kind of your standard trans guy. So I don't know how much it might touch on like queer experiences or anything like that, which I usually like to have in trans masculine books. But even my friends who have that same taste in books recommended it and said that it is actually great. It lives up to how awesome the cover is. I actually had to stop myself from reading it because I need to be finishing other books, but when I bought it, I just immediately like read the first 100 pages. Oops. So those are all of the trans books that I have actually read that I would recommend, but there are a bunch of books that are on my to-read list. I bet there's a bunch that you're gonna recommend in the comments. Maybe you thought I was gonna mention your favorite one and I didn't because I haven't read it yet. I have links to all of these books and more that I have personally curated on Goodreads that I will link to below. You can follow me on Goodreads. I'm always updating it with what I'm reading, trans or otherwise. And like I said, I'll also link to a couple of other Goodreads lists that focus more on trans feminine experiences and non-binary experiences. But whew, that was a lot of books, so that is about it from me for now. I hope this video was helpful. I hope the links below are helpful to you. I know people are always asking this question. I see it at least once a month on trans subreddits. So please share this video with people when you hear them asking about trans books. And in the comments, I want to hear all of your favorite books about gender diversity and nonconformity. Let me know down in the comments, especially if there's some that I didn't mention. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. You can also get notifications if you click that bell-looking icon. And you can follow me in all of the places at Jack Is Not a Bird. And of course, if you feel so inclined, I do have a Patreon that you can go and support. But that is it for now. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.